I will not be allowed to vote. I will not be allowed to represent their interests because of exercising my First Amendment rights.
Just when you thought the trans debate couldn't get more unhinged, Democrats in one state take things in a dystopian new direction. Up first, we gotta talk about Maine, the dark blue New England state that has interestingly become kind of a hotspot for the transgender athlete wars, this hotly contested ongoing debate over whether trans women and trans girls who are biologically male should be allowed to compete in women's and girls' sports. Even though many people think that's unfair, think they have a biological advantage. I share that view, but that's the debate that's heating up, and it's particularly focused on Maine because their Democratic governor spoke out against President Trump's attempt to prohibit this practice and promised to resist it. Plus, in Maine, they have some high-profile high school transgender athletes who are winning and destroying the competition in girls' sports. Here's Fox News reporting on the latest example of that.
Back now to the fight for fairness in women's sports, reaching a flashpoint yet again in the state of Maine. Another transgender athlete winning more girl track events as the governor faces off against the Trump administration over its refusal to bar trans athletes from competing against women. I understand this athlete won the 800 and the 1600 meter races. Had this individual run with the men, the finish would have been 12th place in the 1600th and 8th in the 800 meter. I ask you, how's this fair?
Now, this practice of allowing people born biologically male to compete in women's and girls' sports is incredibly unpopular because it's just not reasonable to most people, even ones who want respect and dignity for all people, trans or not, and even many people in blue states, like in Maine, where this is not a popular program, even though it is supported by most of the elected Democrats in that party. Here's some interesting polling on this question.
Over 1,000 Mainers were recently surveyed for this poll. 64% of Mainers say transgender athletes should not participate in women's sports, and 29% say the opposite, that they should be able to compete.
So given that even in a largely blue state like Maine, this isn't a popular position, it's not exactly shocking that Republican lawmakers in Maine would be against it. Even in blue states where most people do agree with this, you're going to have some conservatives and Republicans who aren't on board. But in this case, the Republicans speaking out are actually representing the majority of people in Maine. Yet, the crackdown facing one female lawmaker, State Representative Laurel Libby, has become truly unhinged and dystopian in the way that her Democratic colleagues have struck out against her and censored her and silenced her in a pretty flagrant violation of the U.S. Constitution and a total 180 on all their supposed values about feminism and supporting democracy just for speaking out on this issue in a way that they disapproved of. The extremely short version of this story is that Libby made a Facebook post, which we'll get into the details, calling out a high school athlete who transitioned to be a trans girl and then dominated a track and field competition. Her Democratic colleagues in the state house not only censured her, like condemned her, but stripped her of her right to speak on the floor and vote on legislation, all because of this Facebook post. Now she finds herself in this really, really insane situation. Take a listen to how she described the current state of affairs in a Fox News interview.
You're not only banned from speaking at the State House in Maine, you're banned from voting because you won't apologize. And I don't think you've changed your position as of now. So they've still got you locked up, don't they?
Yeah, it's been more than 2 months, Bill, actually, that my constituents have not had a voice and vote in the legislature. 2 months of every time that there's a roll call vote, including on the Equal Rights Amendment, which addresses this issue, among others, I was not allowed to vote. So my constituents are being harmed. Every time that we have session in a little bit today, and I will not be allowed to vote. I will not be allowed to represent their interests because of exercising my First Amendment rights.
So you can't speak, you can't vote. I mean, next stop, Salem, Massachusetts, I do believe, right? So stay away from that town.
So we're going to get into the details of all of this, and I'm going to explain why it's so incredibly hypocritical, and it actually gets way worse. It's way worse than you even know, and we're going to get into it after this. The trans debate is getting insane.
My pronouns aren't preferred, they are mandatory.
The only way to figure out what's actually going on is with Ground News, an amazing service that I've used for years and used to prepare this show. Ground News gathers news from all across the world in one place, so you can see what both sides are saying and make up your own mind. It also shows you everything you need to know about a source's ownership, bias, and factuality. Take the recent UK Supreme Court decision, for example. Using Ground News, you can see how outlets on the left are spinning it. The Independent wrote, "Supreme Court ruling, just the latest curb on trans rights worldwide." Plus, you can see how right-wing media is covering the story. The Daily Wire wrote, "UK Supreme Court rules trans-identifying men are not women." That's quite the difference. Using Ground News, you can get a neutral summary of every story, see how both sides are framing it, see who's covering the story at all and who isn't, and most importantly, use your critical thinking skills to make up your mind for yourself. You can get the same plan that I use, which is the Vantage subscription, if you sign up through my link, ground.news/Brad, or scan the QR code on screen. Get 40% off unlimited access, which comes out to about $5 a month. This exclusive discount is available now through this link, so act now to break your media bubble and keep your critical thinking skills sharp. So I think it's important to go over the full context here, starting with the Facebook post that Laurel Libby made that got her in so much trouble in the first place. On February 17th, she attached this photo of two different images spliced together of track and field podiums of the award winners. And one is 3 boys on the left side, and then on the right side is 2 girls and 1 trans girl, I guess is how this person identifies. She attached the following statement to this image. Update. We've learned that just 1 year ago, John was competing in boys pole vault. That's when he had his 5th place finish. So all of this transpired in the last year with the full blessing of the Maine Principals Association. 2 years ago, John tied for 5th place in boys pole vault. Tonight, Katie, which she wrote in quotes, won 1st place in the girls' Maine State Class B Championship. That's it. She just attached this image and this description of events, all of which, to be clear, was publicly reported on in local news outlets and was publicly available information, but she did amplify it with her platform as a local representative with the following criticism. And notably, she did not blur out the face of this athlete or blur out identifiable information on their jersey and such. And that's where some of the criticism came in. And while Libby certainly didn't deserve everything that came next, I think it is actually potentially fair to argue that because this person is a minor, she could have covered their face and covered the name of their school. But that was part of the criticism and then some. They took it to an absolutely astronomical level. Libby's Democratic colleagues in lockstep introduced a resolution censuring her and stripping her of her basic function and duties of voting and speaking on the floor as a duly elected state representative. And this censure resolution is one of the most insane documents I've seen in some time. So this resolution just describes the facts of what Libby did that I just went over, and then criticizes the fact that, quote, accompanying the pictures, Representative Libby posted a statement criticizing the participation of transgender students in high school sports. Fact check, to be clear, she's saying in women's sports. She's not saying they can't participate in sports. Back to the resolution here, they also complain that Representative Libby's post has received national attention, that she has amplified by appearing on national television and radio broadcasts to discuss, which she is totally allowed to do, by the way. Whereas a recent study from the Williams Institute at UCLA found that transgender people are over 4 times more likely to be victims of violence, and whereas numerous replies to Representative Libby's post suggested that harm should come to the young athlete. So obviously we don't want harm to come to anyone, and violence happening to any people or any group of people at disproportionate rates is a bad thing, but Libby never called for violence against anyone. Nothing in that post suggested anything of the sort, and just because some group is disproportionately likely to be subject to violence doesn't mean you can't criticize them or therefore aren't allowed to have opinions about issues related to that group, just because some other people out there sometimes commit violence. That's a complete non sequitur and a disingenuous way to try to shut down an argument. In the same way, Libby is not responsible for what a few random crazy people wrote in her comments section. I mean, that's just not fair. She can't control what other people say, and anytime you speak on a large platform, there'll be some crazy people who see it. By this same logic, if Democratic members of this state legislature had criticized Trump and a couple people in the comments suggest they want violence to happen to Trump, they should be censured. Obviously that not. Like, you're only responsible for your words, and she didn't encourage violence, so she's not responsible for that. But this is what they wrote in this document. point that they used to strip her of her democratically granted powers as an elected official. Whereas Representative Libby's post named the minor and used photos of the minor without that minor's consent in an effort to advance her political agenda, and whereas when it was brought to her attention that her post may endanger the minor, Representative Libby refused to take down the post and instead continued to bring media attention to the minor, and whereas it is a basic tenet of politics and good moral character that children should not be targeted by adult politicians, especially when that targeting could result in serious harm, and whereas the school district, as a result of Representative Libby's actions, has had to increase security at the school, causing unnecessary stress and disruption to other students, parents, teachers, and school support staff in the entire community, and it goes on. So they don't really actually provide any evidence that she has somehow made this person unsafe, but I want everyone to be safe. I don't want harm to come to anyone, but she is not responsible for the actions of others, and you are allowed to criticize people, and you are allowed to, whether you think it's right or not, whether you think you should do it or not, you are allowed to post images of someone, especially when those images are coming from newspapers and public social media posts and are publicly available without their consent. That's like a thing people do all the time. Maybe I do think you could argue she should have maybe blurred the photo of the name of the person, of the face of the person, of the school they go to, and still made her point. But it was publicly available information. She does have a right to share it. That speech is protected by the First Amendment, and yet they are formally punishing her as the state government here for doing it. They also, and this is one of the craziest parts, tried to force her to apologize. The resolution says that Representative Laurel D. Libby must accept full responsibility for the incident and publicly apologize to the House and to the people of the state of Maine. So yeah, no, you can't do that. You can't coerce someone into apologizing. You can't force them to take down their First Amendment protected speech. Everything about this is unconstitutional, a blatant violation of the First Amendment, and deeply, deeply hypocritical from the party that says they're the feminists who want women in politics, but just not women with these opinions or speak out like this, and who stand for democracy, but will literally nullify the will of the people, strip a duly elected representative of their right to vote and speak just because they disagree with something they said. Do y'all not see the hypocrisy here? Seriously? How is that even possible? You don't have to take my word for it, guys, that this is a blatant First Amendment violation. The nonpartisan Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, the nation's premier free speech organization, which, disclaimer, I do a little bit of freelance work for, said this in a statement. The House Majority Party has precluded Libby from doing her job and effectively disenfranchised her constituents, end running Maine constitutional provisions that say a representative cannot be expelled absent a 2/3 vote or recall election. What they mean here is that she is essentially been removed from office without being removed from office, in that if you take away a state representative's right to vote on legislation and speak on the House floor, you've effectively nullified their job that the people granted them the power to do. Yet they did this with just, I believe, a bare majority vote. And the Maine Constitution specifically says if you want to remove someone from office, you need a 2/3 vote of the legislature. So they are flagrantly working around their own state's constitution. But there's also a First Amendment issue here. Fire writes, these actions are a clear example of retaliation based on constitutionally protected speech and amount to removal of an elected representative, essentially because the House majority disagrees with her views or how she chose to express them. 69 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court held that a state legislature could not refuse to seat a duly elected member because of his public statements about the Vietnam War. The Supreme Court wrote then, the manifest function of the First Amendment in a representative government requires that legislators be given the widest latitude to express their views on issues of policy. This is still the law. Under the Constitution, the Maine House cannot censor Libby as it has done. This is exactly right. No matter what you think of Libby's post, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, whether you agree with her on the issue but think she maybe should have censored the student's face or name, it is protected by the First Amendment, unambiguously. And so the government, the state government here, can't punish her for it. And they certainly can't strip her of her titles and responsibilities that the people elected her to do, not without violating their own state's constitution and making complete hypocrites of themselves at every turn, from this Democrat Party that stands for feminism and democracy and the rule of law until you dare criticize trans athletes and women's sports in a way that hurts their fifis. You know it's bad. You know the Democrats done messed up here because even many liberal media outlets and liberal scholars are calling BS on them for this. Vox wrote an article titled, "An anti-trans lawmaker brings a Supreme Court case that she absolutely must win." Ian Millhiser, who is a very left-wing writer, wrote, "To defend democracy, the courts must rule in favor of a lawmaker who bullied a high school student." Now, I think we could quibble with their description of what Libby did as bullying a high school student. I think it's more complicated than that, but just set that aside for a minute. On the main issue here, Vox agrees that Libby is being wronged and that this is illegal. They write, "Some court needs to intervene. Regardless of what anyone thinks about Libby's attack on a high school student, allowing lawmakers to strip their colleagues of their ability to vote on legislation would set an alarming precedent that could be easily used by authoritarian legislators to stifle dissent." I would argue that that is exactly what is already happening here, but sure. Vox further writes, "Otherwise, any lawmaker who is in the minority within their legislative body could be targeted by colleagues who want to silence them and disenfranchise their constituents." I mean, kudos to Vox for being fair and calling this out. And it's a good point, right? That if in a blue state, you can just strip a duly elected member of the state representative, of the state legislature of their right to vote because they said something protected by the First Amendment, but it upset you. Well, if you don't think they could do that for everyone, every blue, ultra progressive, ultra woke state lawmaker in a red state who says something outrageous or offensive, they can't. There's no one way without the other. And this shouldn't be a Pandora's box that progressives and Democrats want to open, because if they do and they somehow get away with it, trust me, it's going to come back to bite y'all. It absolutely is. Now, Representative Libby is now appealing this to the Supreme Court, and her lawyers wrote this in their application to the High Court to stop this injustice. Representative Libby's thousands of constituents in Maine House District 90 are now without a voice or vote for every bill coming to the House floor for the rest of her elected term, which runs through 2026. They are disenfranchised. Libby and her district had no vote on the state's $11 billion budget, had no vote on a proposed constitutional amendment, and will have no vote on hundreds of more proposed laws, including, most ironically, whether Maine should change its current policy of requiring girls to compete alongside transgender athletes. The Supreme Court needs to stop this madness. It is flagrantly illegal and obviously unconstitutional, so much so that even liberal legal analysts can agree, and the Democratic Party, at least in Maine, needs to get a grip. You are never going to bully, intimidate, silence, and crush people into going along with such a fringe and illogical position. And the more you try, honestly, the more it will harden people's resolve to stand up against this absolute madness. So look, I'm sure I have my disagreements with Libby, and I would have probably went about it in a different way, but I stand behind her as a matter of law, basic democracy, and constitutional order. What Democrats are doing here is absurd, and they need to be stopped. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments, because this story is so crazy. I knew it was bad, but the more I looked into it, the crazier it got. Let me know what you think. Please do consider subscribing. If you haven't yet, do hit that like button before you go. And remember to send me voice notes with your woke horror stories, with your personal situations and life experiences you want my advice on to respond to in upcoming episodes. Remember to check out the merch line linked in the description.